Hey folks, welcome to the Pass Priority Podcast, a podcast where we're going to talk about competitive Commander from a totally different perspective. I'm your host, Greg, and today I'm joined by my two lovely co-hosts, Evan and Dante.
What's up, everyone? I'm Evan, also known as ZClan7 on Discord. I moderate the Animar Discord and maintain the current cEDH Animar deck list.
Hey everyone, I am Dante, also known as Kodama Nuts. I float around on a few cEDH Discord servers, most notably the Kodama Discord server, and you'll see me hanging around the Playing with Power Discord as well.
Yeah, I'm also on the Playing with Power Discord fairly often. But let's jump right into this. So today's topic is like how do we evaluate cards before testing them? And how should different deck archetypes approach this concept of evaluating cards before actually putting it into the list? And so, like, before putting a card into your deck, what qualities do we look for in a card? And what do we think about? And starting off that discussion, let's talk about, like, what do we look at for a card when we put something in mid-range? Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to talk about how you can view certain cards for different deck archetypes, especially in mid-range. So you're going to look at the ceiling and the realistic floor of a card for a mid-range deck, where you're going to be seeing how a deck or how a certain card in a deck would want to perform over a few turns, as opposed to instant value type of thing. So I wanted to ask you what you think a certain card for mid-range would look like if you were to see it spoiled in a set and would be thinking about it in a mid-range deck.
Yeah, so actually, like, I think there is a card we could talk about in the situation. We could chat about Saw in Half, which is, I think it's legal now. I'm not sure when Unfinity is coming out. I think by the time this podcast comes out, it will be legal.
Didn't it come out on October 7th?
Oh, yeah, set's already out. It's the 10th today. So, all right. But Saw in Half, let's chat about this card.
Yes, there was a lot of hype on it for a long time.
Ton of hype about this card, and I think a lot of it's fallen off recently. But I saw one line where someone was talking about Saw in Half plus Eternal Witness and Dark Ritual, I think, created infinite Eternal Witnesses.
Yeah, you're gonna want
a funky line.
It's strange because you look at Saw in Half and you think, "Oh my God, I'm gonna clone my Dockside."
Yeah,
a bunch of times, create a bunch of treasures. That was the number one thing. But what is Saw in Half really doing for a mid-range deck if it's not the very best thing, which is cloning your Dockside?
It's not doing much. I can understand why people got really excited about it because it's like, oh my God, it's flexible. Like, I can remove stuff and I can double stuff on my own board. It's really good. There's a lot of combo potential with this. I can do dual caster things. But when you actually look at it, like, you are never using this to remove a creature on someone else's board.
Yep.
Like, there are very few situations in which it's like Saw in Half is the answer to a threat. If an opponent's about to start like an Emil Dockside loop and it's like, oh, I have the answer, I'll Saw in Half their Emil. It's like, great, I'll do it again with my second Emil.
So it can't really be counted as interaction, and you have to have something going on for yourself to make it worthwhile at 3 mana.
I don't even think Dockside is the best thing you can be doing in a mid-range strategy. It's actually copying your Wandering Archaic.
Right, or your Consecrated Sphinxes.
Or your Consecrated Sphinx. Yeah, you need to be playing these huge bombs, which honestly are already powerful enough by themselves that they don't need doubling. So Saw in Half just is in this really weird spot where it's like, fine. It's just fine.
I think one direction you could look at Saw in Half is maybe protection for a certain piece. If someone's trying to interact with your board state, you can double it up pretty quickly. I think that's the one argument for that, but even then,
Veil of Summer exists, and you could just Veil.
What about my Dispel? That's 1 blue mana as compared to the 3 mana.
Right.
I think that's the biggest argument against Saw in Half here.
Yeah,
as a protection.
I think like in terms of like my example, like say someone's like Path to Exiling your whatever it is, so like one of your combo pieces, if it's a creature combo, and then you cast Saw in Half and that. But obviously it can get countered, and at that point, I think
Yeah, I mean, if you're at the point where the interaction for your combo, this is a, you know, it's hard to come up with perfect examples for everything,
mhm,
but if the only answer that people have to your combo is like a Path to Exile or a Swords to Plowshares targeting your combo, um, Saw in Half is not what you should be looking for to protect that. You
right,
should really just be looking for Veil of Summer or a counterspell or a deflecting spot. Even
yep.
I would run Misdirection over Saw in Half if your reason to include Saw in Half was just to protect your creature based combo, as well as like, oh, it can double my dockside sometimes.
This is
It's just
actually a
not
crazy argument that I run
valuable
into
to
all the
me.
time. That I'll have people come to me with questions and they'll ask me if certain cards are viable for Animar specifically or any other
Yeah,
mid-range deck, and I have to ask them if another counterspell would just be the better answer here as a more flexible spot or card for that
Hmm.
slot.
yeah,
And it's more than often that you just say just run another counterspell. In this case, Misdirection would be awesome for your permanent based combos.
yeah.
Because it has a lot more utilization outside of Sonhap. I think that's the thing. If Sonhap had a clause where you could also use it as removal, you one is remove target opponent or target opponent's creature,
Yeah, and then
or
giving them two more creatures.
yeah, right,
But
yeah. So if you had a clause that didn't do that, say like the
yeah,
first one was exile target opponent's creature or destroy target's opponent creature, and then the second clause was, destroy your own creature, create two copies, yada yada yada. That would make the card a lot better. That would increase
astronomically
its
better.
ceiling. Yeah.
Astronomically better.
But
But
because it doesn't have that utilization, it's a dead card
oh,
outside of a lot of other things.
it's a very bad card on its own. It
It's
it
great for
really only
casual.
has, yeah, great for fantastic art for casual, but it in competitive it really only has its uses where there are already better options.
Hmm.
Like it's not a better replacement for the dual caster mage combo.
No,
Um,
because you still have to give them haste,
yeah,
right?
it's, I mean, it's, I guess if you have a Corpse Knight and you have things entering and triggering Corpse Knight and dealing damage that way, but now you're just making an already
Now you're
efficient
running
combo way
more
You're adding
worse
cards.
way more
just to
cards.
play the brand new
Yeah.
card. And I actually think that's a really good point to look at when evaluating like new
Yeah.
stuff. It's like if the new stuff that I'm adding or looking at or can even considering running for a deck requires me to also play these three effects and these things and this situation and have everything work for me, the card's not good.
Right.
It's the more clauses you put on a card to say like this is only good in this situation and if this happens and if this happens, it's just it's too much. You're trying too hard to make a card work.
Yeah. Yeah. So and going back to that, our main question here, what qualifies a card to be considered an inclusion in certain decks? That was one of my notes. Is uh, you need to look at, is this card a standalone enhancement for your deck, or does it require other cards to make it good? And if it's the latter, then I don't think it's worth the include,
Yeah.
because now you're adding a bunch of other cards that can also just be considered dead cards outside of what you want to do. Um, so going back to what qualities you want, it's like that number one quality is, does it enhance my deck's gameplay? Does it increase its efficiency? Is it a standalone card that does that?
Hmm.
Yeah, and what I'd like to talk about next actually is Professional Facebreaker. Um, in my opinion, one of the like one, two or three good cards from New Capenna when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
What is a professional facebreaker again? That's a
she is a two colorless, one red, 2/3 creature
mm-hmm.
with menace. That creates treasures when your creatures do combat damage, and then you can exile a treasure to, or sacrifice a treasure to her to exile a card off the top of your deck and play it for
Gotcha.
that turn.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when I was first looking at this card, I was like, oh my god, because it's both an enabler in the early game to make mana, and then it's also your payoff for everything after your setup.
Hmm.
Um, which is what I thought immediately when I first looked at it, and
It's a
I
mono
couldn't
red
think of a
Tymna.
good.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't think of a bad floor for this card, and I want to know what you guys think of an effect like this in a mid-range deck.
I think this is everything that Tymna wants to be. Is
Hmm.
an evasive creature that's both mana advantage and card advantage. You know, and it's insane in the sense that it's also super easy to cast. It's just red and two colorless is much easier to cast than a Tymna style effect. And Tymna's a really good card in mid range, right?
Yeah.
Tymna draws a ton of cards. Well,
Hmm.
Professional Facebreaker plus a Tymna is just you are going so over the top of what your opponents are doing right now because you're drawing two cards rotation and exiling two cards and getting two treasures. Excuse me.
Right.
And if you don't need that mana, that's just two more cards that you're getting. And at
So
its by itself, it has menace too. So
yeah, no,
it's gonna connect.
it's a it's a domination card. It's great. It's and you know, to go back to my point earlier, and Greg's point, when you're talking about cards, you know, is it a standalone enhancement or does it require other cards to make it good? This card doesn't require other cards to make it good.
Mm-hmm.
However, because we are in this meta of treasures, you know, any other card that involves treasures, Dockside, it makes this card super gas because you know you have a Dockside come in off of professional Facebreaker. You create so many treasures. You have a lot of impulsive draw. Then
Mm-hmm.
it just professional Facebreaker is a great card on its own, but it has a lot of other outlets that really enhance it even further.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. One of the other reasons why I think Professional Facebreaker is just so great is that, exactly as you said earlier, it doesn't need anything else. Your deck is already running creatures. You have at least one in the command zone. And in any situation, whether even if you just get a single combat off of Professional Facebreaker and you just get that treasure, right? It's still, I guess it's like a 3 mana Ragavan at that point, but
Or Malcolm.
Ragavan's a totally different beast. Professional Facebreaker being able to trigger off of your other creatures that you control is just what makes this card.
Yep.
It's just it makes it really good.
Yeah. So I have that card, professional Facebreaker, in a Malcolm Bruce list I have, and it's gas.
Oh, oh man, because he gets double strike too. Ugh,
Yep.
that's so good.
So Professional Facebreaker has been out for a while, so it's obviously been tested and is proven to be
Hmm.
good after speculation.
Hmm.
But a card that I haven't seen a whole lot is Black Market Connections. I mean, I have seen that it's a $30 card, but
Yeah, that's expensive.
what do
Yeah.
you guys think of that? Because when I first saw it, I thought of Sylvan Library, but then I also thought about how much I really don't like Sylvan Library because
Right.
of
Yeah.
the slowness of its inherent effect.
We're on that
So
hype train, by the way. Sylvan Library sucks. But
yeah.
back to Black Market Connections.
So I don't know. I think I may have a little bit of a bias towards this card because it totally replaced Sylvan Library for me. So for a little bit of context, I mostly play Abzan. I do Timna Kodama, and Black Market Connections is you know, description of the card. Um, let me find a description of it because I don't
I
have it
got it
up.
pulled up. I'll read this off for you.
Yeah, sure.
So, Black Market Connections is a 3 mana black enchantment, and it says at the beginning of your pre combat main phase, choose one or more of these effects. There is create a treasure token, you lose 1 life, draw a card, you lose 2 life, and create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling, you lose 3 life.
Right.
So, you can pay 6 life, you can get 3 different things. Go ahead, Dante. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, back to Timna Kodama, which is like my baby of a deck. This card is absolute gas if you get out pretty early. It's 3 CMC, which one more than Sylvan Library, so you know it's in terms of like getting it, your curve to get it out. It, you know, you could probably get it out turn one. Most likely turn two, turn three.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically for me, you know, the pros is it's +1 card advantage for 3 life, +1 treasure, and +1 attacker for Temna, which is that's just a lot that you have going on there. Additional pros with the deck, you know, for me with Kodama out, I now have 2 additional Kodama triggers for ramp if I have lands in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
The only, you know, when you're talking about cons for it is, you know, there's still summoning sickness for those for, you know, when you hire a mercenary for that 3 life. So you still have the summoning sickness, so you have to wait another turn rotation. So in terms of like getting out your payoff for the card, it's 3 CMC. You can probably curve it out turn two. uh, you're waiting one turn to have to have a treasure token. So that kind of brings down the cost to it down to 2 CMC.
Mm-hmm.
And then for paying 3 life total, you create a treasure token and you draw a card. So you create it's 2 CMC technically to draw a card is
Yeah.
how you want to evaluate it in terms of that. And then paying 6 life, now you have a creature on board. It's 3/2 changeling. You've paid 6 life. You created a treasure. You draw a card, and you have a creature to attack with Temna.
So
So
it seems that I'm gonna cut you off here, but it seems that you've tested this for quite some time now. How long did it take you to be totally convinced that this is your pick over Sylvan Library?
I mean, for me, it just kind of made sense to replace Sylvan Library because Sylvan Library is pay 8 life to draw 2 extra cards. This is pay 6 life to not only draw a card, create a treasure token, uh, but also create another attacker. So
Create Timna
you're
attacker.
another Timna attacker, right? So you are getting a lot more utilization out of the card than you would rather than Sylvan Library for only 1 extra CMC, which is paid for already uh, in your following turn.
Yeah. So this actually falls. So when I evaluate cards, specifically for the slower strategies, because I'm not an expert at the fast stuff, but I always look for three things, and it's consistency. Like at any point in the game, if I rip this card off the top of my library, is like, am I happy to see this? Like if I, turn one, I see it. Turn nine, I see it. Is this
Mm-hmm.
something I'm happy to see on my list? And if it's not, I usually don't want to play it. The other
Yeah,
thing is cost. It needs to be like a realistic casting cost.
right.
Some hot new card will come out and it'll be like, oh, this is 6, 7 mana. I don't know if I want to try that. Or it's like, this cost me 3 blue pips. I don't know. And the other thing is value over time. If a card, this is exactly what Black Market Connections is like
Mm-hmm.
perfect at, is its value over time, because it just gets better the longer the game goes. And
Yep.
even if you get a single trigger off of Black Market Connections, it's you've gotten what you paid for, right? You
Yep.
paid 3 mana, you drew a card, you made a creature, you also made a treasure. That's fantastic. If you get another trigger off of Black Market Connections, you have doubled your value. You've paid 3 mana for 2 creatures, 2 cards, and 2 treasures. If there was
Yeah.
any card in this game, like any 3 mana sorcery that just said make 2 3/2s, draw 2 cards, and make 2 treasure tokens, it would be banned instantly,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so value over time is something to really look at when we're thinking about mid-range and slower strategies.
And that's the thing too. When you're talking about getting that trigger twice, that's a total of 12 life that you paid. And
Mm-hmm.
for people that are worried about life total, I mean, it's a resource. 12 life for all of that utilization, as opposed to Sylvan Library. If you were to pay 12 life, you're drawing 3 extra cards, and that's it.
You get 4 extra cards. Oh yeah, 3 extra cards total. You're right.
Three extra
You're right.
cards, yeah.
Yeah.
16 life if you want to do 4, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I
That's
guess that's a great comparison over time. Is like, do you want 3 cards or do you want 6 different things happening?
Yeah.
But
I think that's a really good way to look at it. Greg, you were mentioning lower or slower strategies and how they want to evaluate cards over time. I know that you play almost exclusively control, so how would you then look at a slow control list when you're evaluating cards, as opposed to just a normal mid-range list is just looking for its value now?
yeah, so a lot of the time in control, it's a weird subject that I could go on a tangent on for hours and hours and hours. But for a while, I was on Rashmi Eternity's Crafter in the 99, and on a lot of these effects, that was like comparable to Timna, kind of, where you cast it and then the next turn you swing with Timna, or you do the thing and you trigger your effect and you get your advantage. And that's kind of the spot where control wants to be at, or control is fine being at. Control really doesn't mind playing cards that trigger the next turn, or are only good the next turn, because there's a good chance that with the amount of interaction you're running, you're getting the next turn, unless you know you have to deal with 3 win attempts in a row, and they can all try to protect themselves. Or you're playing in the super Nas heavy meta where you sit down with your fancy control deck and you're up against 3 Roger Silas lists. It's like card evaluation for control could tangent, but control is a really meta dependent deck. There's no one stock list you should be playing in every situation. You really have to change it based on what you're frequently up against. And evaluating cards for control, it follows the same thing. I play with a group of people, Connor and a couple others, and they basically only play Turbo Nas. And so I have been cutting a lot of my slower, cuter card advantage engines because I need to run more interaction. I need to be able to survive into these Nas piles. But then when I go play on other meta or other servers or other metas, like the Playing of Power meta is a great example. It's really slow. It's really mid-rangey. There's a lot of Thrasios X decks.
Yep,
And I don't
you
know
thrive
why
there.
I thrive in that meta because I love playing the slow card advantage, and no one respects it.
I played in both metas that you're talking about. I played in Playing with Power, and I play with Connor and all of them. And no, I totally get exactly where you're coming from about how you need your control deck to be meta dependent. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you will either thrive or just lay over and
But
do nothing.
But that's exactly how we evaluate cards for control, right? Is like,
Right.
what meta are you going into? How do you prepare for that meta? And a great example is Exalted Flamer of. Now I'm
Okay,
going to butcher this name. Exalted Flamer of Tizen Tech?
Zinch. Zinch is how you say it. Zinch.
All right.
It's from Warhammer, but I'm really interested to see what you have to say about this card since you brought it up.
All right. So I this is not a card I would play into the Connor meta. The really fast, the really nausy
Grixis core list.
Grixis core lists. Like, I don't want to be playing this card there. But the second I'm going to go back to playing on the Playing of Power meta more often, oh my gosh, this card is going to be amazing. So this card is a 4-mana, 2 colorless, a blue-red demon from the Warhammer set. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is a 4-mana, every upkeep, return, or every one of your upkeeps return a random instant or sorcery from yard to hand. So yes, it's information revealed. Because if you're returning a counterspell, right, people aren't going to just jam Nauses into your counterspell unless they have a counterspell of their own. But it's that information goes 2 ways, and there's a bunch of fun stuff involved with that. The other line of text that I really like is that it's also a curiosity enabler, and the deck runs quite a few of those effects where you pair a curiosity onto this, and then every time I cast my counterspell, I draw 3 cards.
Which is really the thing you want to be doing.
It's better than Vile Smasher in that situation.
Looking at that a little bit more, and you're running, and your curious control list, you're running Tandem Lookout, Keen Sense, Curiosity. Are you running another one, or is it those 3?
My private list is on Ophidian-Eye, but
Ophidian-Eye,
I haven't published that one yet.
So that's crazy because the strategy of Curious Control, you're wanting to cast an instant sorcery pretty much almost on everyone's turn, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
So if you land one of those curiosity effects on this card, you're drawing 3 cards, not each turn, but every time you cast an instant or sorcery, which is just insane value.
Yeah. No, it's people really don't appreciate what curiosity does when it's paired with some cards. Back when Kessig Flamebreather came out, it's just a 2-mana red and a colorless. I think it's a human. The creature type doesn't matter. It's a 1/3, so it survives Flame Sweep, and it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. I ran that for like 3 weeks, and I would just aggressively mulligan for that and a curiosity effect, or that and a tutor for the curiosity effect, or any combination of. And I would just jam that combo line because it survived all of the little sweepers that my deck just enjoys running.
Yep.
And if I can get that engine going, and then oh, I'm just gonna cast an Arcane Signet and draw 3 cards. Oh, look, there's my Mox Amber. Oh, I draw 3 more cards. Oh, here's a Ponder. I draw 3 more cards. It gets out of control way too fast.
Yep. Yep.
And Exalted Flamer of Tizentech does that, but it also gives you your instants and sorceries back, and it's also a 2/4, so it blocks basically everything. Yeah, it's a pretty good card for slower metas, but I wouldn't run it in any situation where it's like 3 Nas decks. Like
Yeah.
that's just a bad
So I guess, one of the things that we should maybe mention too, or touch briefly on, is the comparison between CDH and TEDH, tournament metas.
Oh.
Is this
This
a
is-
card? Is this a card that you would want to include in your deck if you're running in a tournament? Like, the previous tournaments that we went to was Punt City. Would this card do well in something like that?
Absolutely not.
So I find this argument kind of really interesting and hard to approach because there's so many variables in cEDH in itself that to look at a single tournament or say tournament play and ask if this card is, or any card for that matter, is good in tournament play
Mhm.
is really kind of against what the format is doing as a whole and really hard to evaluate, which is a really hot take maybe, but
I think I disagree with you there because I think it depends on archetype, right? I mean, we could look at, say, Dark Ritual is just being newly printed, right? First ever, 1 mana ritual that makes 3 mana at instant speed.
if it were to be
You could-
printed brand new,
If
like
it were to be
tomorrow.
printed brand new, right?
Okay.
Or we have Dark Ritual brand new, never been printed before, printed tomorrow, releases tomorrow. Anyone could look at that and be like, oh my god, this just instantly fits in with Nas. This instantly fits in with any proactive strategy running black. They just need the mana. It's super great. And the challenge about card evaluation is like a lot of cards for the slower or more reactive decks, like they're not that easy to pick up on. Like you need a thorough understanding of the format and those archetypes to really look at a card and be like, oh damn, like that's actually pretty good. Because I
Right.
remember when Black Market Connections was spoiled. I think Dante was pretty high on it. You pre-ordered a couple for fairly cheap, and I was like, I'm not going to order this for like $4. This card's going to be 20 cents. I was wrong.
I bought a couple copies for $5 and sold one, and now I'm happy about it. So
Yeah, no, I was not that happy about it. But it's a perfect example of how it's impossible to evaluate cards, or it's not impossible, but it's difficult to evaluate cards for slower stuff for tournaments.
Right.
Just because slower stuff is really challenging to play, and slower stuff is really good when you know what the meta is. I mean,
Right.
in the 60 card situation, control decks are built to attack the meta. You have to know what like the top decks are, and then control has to run the cards to beat those top decks. Well, the cEDH metagame is so broad that like if I decide, oh, I'm going into a tournament, maybe I know 3 people that are going and I know they're going to be on Winota, right? It's like I'll slot in my Grafdigger's Cage and my Urza's Saga to help find my Grafdigger's Cage. That could be like my meta thing, right? And then I'll show up and it's like just a bunch of like, there's 128 people at a tournament, right? And I brought cards specifically to battle 3 decks or 3 people that I know are going to be there. It's not a great way to approach a tournament, and I think the concept of a primer control list is what you need to be running for a tournament setting, where it's just generically good against a bunch of strategies, because anything that you curate over a private meta is not going to be great in a tournament setting.
yeah. So getting back on track to Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch.
Yes, correct.
Tzeentch.
I don't believe you. That's not how you pronounce that.
All right, fair enough.
So this is a card that has it come out? No, it hasn't come out
No.
yet.
Oh no.
Okay.
Warhammer came out
I believe
like,
they just
yesterday.
They just came
came
out.
out.
So
Yeah.
this is a card that's fresh for testing. So I'm curious how this card will end up for you. If it will be something that's going to be a really good include for Curious Control, or if it's going to fall by the wayside. If it's going to be something that you're like, well, I don't really feel like playing this card right now.
Historically, I've gotten really high on cards that have ended up being terrible. So we'll see how this
It's
goes.
the whole point of evaluation. So,
Right.
but that's good because you can test cards and then look back and use that experience to
Yeah.
then look at more cards coming out.
Yeah.
we did touch briefly earlier about turbo lists, specifically Grixis piles, and I want to talk about how a Grixis pile or turbo Nas deck, quote unquote, there would look at a new card coming out. Um,
Ooh.
like what the floor of a card in a turbo deck would look like versus the ceiling. And I'll just start off right away with saying like the floor of a card is if the control deck runs out of, I think as a control deck, you're thinking to yourself, if I run out of things to do, what do I want to see in my deck? I don't want to top deck the Dark Ritual when I have two other cards in my hand and I just can't do anything with the mana
Hmm.
as a floor for a card. So if that's the floor, then what would be the ceiling
The ceiling for a card in control or for turbo?
in Turbo and Grixis
Oh
piles
yeah, in Grixis
specifically?
piles. Yeah. So I think the ceiling. I mean, the ceiling is up there, right? I mean, Wizards printed Dockside Extortionist, so I think like the ceiling is infinitely high right now. Um, I mean, any 1 mana or 2 mana tutor effect, anything that draws you cards, any sweet cantrip. I mean, DRC or Dragon's Rage Channeler. I think it's falling out of turbo decks right now because people are just realizing it's kind of awkward to set up.
Hmm.
But like that card was considered the ceiling for a while. It was, it's a 1 mana thing that filters your draws and it fuels your Underworld Breach. What could possibly be better? And then people started playing Intuition more, and it was like, yeah, that card is just really good. But no,
Right.
the ceiling is really hard to determine for any format, for any archetype, really. Just because I could comprehend some incredibly powerful card, and even if we're evaluating cards that do exist, right, and we're looking at them from the sense of a ceiling, it's like, well, the ceiling would be stacking my deck to draw exactly what I need. Um, it's I think it's more realistic to look at a solid middle ground when we're evaluating cards for a turbo deck. So it's like, control doesn't want Dark Ritual because Dark Ritual just accelerates on mana and it doesn't accelerate us on what we actually need, which is cards or ways to draw more cards.
Hmm.
Because frequently that deck will have enough mana to do stuff. But in Turbo, it's actually kind of the same thing. I mean, those decks generate so much mana, and then they're able to put it into something explosive like an Ad Nauseam or an Underworld Breach or an Intuition to find your Underworld Breach. But if you can't find your payoff, then there's no reason to have all this mana. Like, I could generate like 8 mana on turn 3, but I don't have a tutor, and I don't have a wheel to find my tutor, or I don't have any draw effects, because my deck is just jammed packed with mana, right? So I feel like what those decks really need is just some form of card draw.
Which is
But I'm
why
getting off on a tangent.
that's right. It's actually worth talking about because as a turbo deck, when you have all these enablers and let's just say, for instance, you can't find your payoff all the time, you just fall back on your commanders, and your commanders usually draw the cards.
Hmm.
Timna Krom, for example, or Timna anything, or Krom anything, as a turbo deck is really powerful because it can make the mana and then have just the payoff in the command zone if it needs it.
Yeah.
So I think when they're looking at cards, they're not necessarily looking for any way to enhance their card draw, unless it's like a heuristic study effect, but or something like that. But they're not looking for a way to draw cards. They're just looking for a way to just end the game on the spot as soon as they can do it,
Hmm.
Right.
which is
Yeah.
essentially cutting everything that's not just written win the game on the card.
Effectively, right? Those decks tend to cut a lot of the fluff for just mana and just like their wins. Um, I think they do that to a fault sometimes, where they just add so much mana, where it gets to the point where it's like, oh, you've blown your load, you got stopped, you're in top deck mode, and all you're seeing is like, oh, there's a Mox Opal, there's more mana, oh, there's a Rite of Flame, there's more mana, oh, there's like a Signet or something, or and they get stuck on that issue of mana and mana and mana, and there's no way to dig through their deck. Um, there is definitely a point where you can hit the ratio of mana generation to like good cards is off, but
The payoffs, yeah.
yeah,
No,
that's
100% agree. The card quality off the top deck of a turbo deck is definitely not going to be the card quality of the top deck of a control list or a mid-range list, which
Right.
yeah,
is
or stacks list or anything.
Yeah.
anything like that, which is definitely something to look at.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a really interesting point because like yeah, I mean you do have to evaluate card quality, and I feel like in a lot of the slower meta archetypes, the card quality is increased compared to turbo.
Hmm. Well, as I said earlier, when you're playing the game plan, right? What's more important is value over time. You want
Hmm.
consistency, so you want a card to be good at any stage of the game, right? Like Mystic Remora, Ristic Study, great at any stage of the game. But you also want cards that are going to do something for you over time.
Right.
And so, like, a weird but honestly fine example of this, um, Archivist, Archivist of Ogma is a neat example of value over time because literally all you do, 2 mana, flash it out in response to someone's tutor, draw a card, right?
Yep.
And then every time someone tutors for the rest of the game, you draw cards and you gain life, and it's great. But that card just falls under the. It fails to be consistent. Every time that I've seen it been played, it's like you draw one, maybe two cards, and that's it. But I've also seen games where it draws like 11, so it's one of those wildly inconsistent cards. And what do you
Yep.
guys think about that one? Um,
Well, I know Dante does play this card, so let him talk here in a second. But I would, with Blue Farm or any Grixis core list, in my opinion, well, not Grixis core because it's a white card, but
yeah,
any turbo deck that has white in it, they're really just looking for effects that you can just plop on the battlefield and get value. Like just
yeah,
let it sit there and get values. That way it can do its turbo thing, but then also if it gets stopped, doesn't have to really worry about setting any sort of engine up. It just needs to set up something.
hmm,
And just it's a one card thing that you can just top deck it and play it. So I think it's really good, at least when I first saw it and have seen it for that kind of archetype.
yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, and I guess kind of going off that, I'm still a little high on this card. I think it's great for my list
yeah.
because I would consider my deck, in a sweet spot between mid range and turbo. It's kind of like pseudo turbo, mid range adaptive. It's kind of a combination of those kind of things, and I think Archivist of Ogma does a really good job in my list. It's again, it's Timna Kodama. So for me, Archivist of Ogma, and to give a description of the card, it's a 1 and a white flash 2/2 creature that has whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So
Hmm.
for me, the pros, it's a creature. It has flash. It's draw and gain life. Additional benefits, it's that you're going to be casting this card on someone else's turn on your upkeep. So you're going to be casting. So say your turn one is a land and a Mox Diamond, or
Hmm.
something to that effect. Um, you cast this on that turn cycle. You flash in a Archivist Dogma to someone searching their library. It's 2 CMC to draw a card. You get to your turn two. You play another land. You cast Timna. You already have an attacker. That's a 2/2. No
Yeah.
one's gonna block that pretty much,
Unless
um,
they have the turn one Thrasios, but
unless they have the turn one
it's
Thrasios or
also the
turn
the
one
thing where it's
Nagila.
like that Archivist of Ogma now draws you because you got it out on turn one, right?
Hmm.
Or because you get it out on turn two sometimes, you're still getting those benefits without paying any additional mana. It's not like every time someone or Mind's Eye, I think is the name of the card. It's a 5 mana artifact where whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay one to also draw a card. And it's like I wish that was like one CMC instead of five, so you could just start piggybacking off of people really early in the game. But it's basically like a better version of that, right? Someone is doing an effect or they're taking an action that accelerates their game plan, right? Instead of drawing a cards, it's searching their library, whether it's off a fetch land or a tutor, or they got Assassin's Trophy. Now they're like, shucks, gotta go find my basic. Um, but it's like every time they're taking an action, you're taking an action for free. And that for free is really, really good. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just that whole thing of just playing a card and it just gives you the value. You don't have to do
Right.
anything else to set it up, which is why I think that it's actually such a great card, especially in your list or Timna lists. But I kind of wanted to move the conversation to stacks now, when in comparison of just playing a card and seeing it do the thing right away without a whole lot more setup for it.
Ooh.
So when a new card is released, how would a stacks deck then look at a new card coming out? How it would be good, or it would just be completely dead on the battlefield?
So I think Stacks really wants effects that, Stacks and Control tackle the meta, right? And so I think the best Stacks cards, or a new Stacks card that would have to come out, would be something that tackles what is already like popular and what's already strong. So you need more rule of laws, hopefully not asymmetric, but you would want rule of laws, and you would want ETB cancelers or null rod effects, or honestly another Dothy Voidwalker style effect. Like
Dothy has
any
been really good.
any Dothy's been good, but anything that hates on artifact mana, anything that hates on how many spells you can cast per turn, and anything that hates on your grave on opponents' graveyards, really good right now. And
Yeah.
what's kind of awkward is that sometimes evaluating stacks cards can be difficult, because if it's a weird one, right? Like, I'm gonna stop creature enter the battlefield triggers, right? Or I think, is it Containment Priest, the one with flash, and if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, you
Yes.
exile it instead?
Yes.
Something like that. So that's an active stacks piece. That's something you are casting in response to like a Protein Hulk trigger. It's something you are casting in response to some crazy thing, right? And it's a gotcha. It's basically a counter spell at that point. You're doing something to prevent something from happening. And where it becomes really difficult to evaluate stacks is when you do something with the sole purpose of preventing something from even like beginning. Like, I play a Sanctum Prelate on 1, right? I will never know about the Soul Ring my opponent has in his hand, because he literally cannot cast it. Right, and it's a preventive thing, and sometimes it can be really hard to evaluate stacks when you're looking at cards that are only good because they prevent and not because they actively impact the board.
Well, let me ask you this then. So if there's such a thing as proactive and reactive stacks, how would then a reactive stacks list look at a card coming out? If it would, you would think it would want to be something that preferably instant speed, right? So you can stop it at the time it's happening. But
Mhm.
what kind of symmetrical effects would they want to be looking for to be able to react to something happening and stop it as a stack stack?
Rest in peace with Flash. Yeah.
Oh, for
but,
sure.
No, but basically, like, a reactive stack would just want any current stacks piece reprinted with Flash, or at 1 CMC higher with Flash.
Well, how about this? When I mean reactive, mulligan. On my first mulligan,
Oh
I'm looking
yeah.
for the stacks piece that actively stops this deck archetype from doing what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Reactive, how about in that case? So you're actively playing around your opponent's decks.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not an expert stacks player, so this is kind of a difficult question. But uh, honestly, mulliganing for stacks and evaluating cards based off of like this even goes past just the simple like evaluation of, is a card gonna be playable in an archetype, because now we're looking at like, is this card playable in this archetype in this situation, and now we're making mulligan decisions on it, and it just shows to how many layers there are when it comes to evaluating cards. And
Yeah, stacks deck especially. I'll just give an example then.
yeah, go for
Uh,
it.
so a reactive stacks deck that's just looking for the generically good stacks pieces is going to look for that really early turn 1 Dothy or turn 1 Stony Silence effect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I would assume that, as you said, they're looking for any reprint of an effect that just affects everyone at once without slowing down their own game plan,
Yeah,
as a reactive stacks deck. But then I bring up reactive stacks deck because Winota is a proactive stacks
it's a
deck.
very proactive
Yeah.
stacks
Yep.
deck.
So
Oh, we should talk about
then,
Winota.
yeah, I want to talk about Winota because it's just so different than every stacks deck that's come before it. So I kind of want to talk about how Winota would review a new card coming out. Um,
Probably has to be a human or a
Probably has to be a
non-human.
human or non-human, really cheap to cast, or make a lot of mana to just cast that
Yeah,
Winota on turn 2 or 3.
So Professional Facebreaker is a great card.
it's a
Yeah,
fantastic
fantastic.
Winota. Oh my
But
gosh.
let's move on from that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So what would Winota want? Or
well,
how would
I think
Winota
the
evaluate cards?
yeah, I think the core issue here is that none of us are really stacks players. I
We
play
should get Mike
Sithis,
on the
but I don't play.
podcast, but
We should. But I don't play Winota, and none of us play hard stack decks, so it's really hard for us to analyze cards like this. But we should talk about Clown Car actually, just
Clown
as
Car.
the Winota card that just for
it's
now,
it's hilarious.
absolutely hilarious.
You got the text pulled up for Clown Car?
Yeah, I do. So Clown Car is an X to cast artifact vehicle 1/1. When Clown Car ETBs, roll X six-sided dice. For each odd result, create a 1/1 white clown robot artifact creature token. For each even result, put a +1/+1 counter on Clown Car crew for 2. So ridiculous in Winota because you can 50% of the time, right, on each dice roll, you're gonna make an additional Winota attacker. Or you could just literally play it on 0 and it's a 1/1 crew for 2 non-human to trigger the Winota.
Yeah.
Which
No,
Winota can
it's
crew, so it's just
which
ridiculous.
Winota can crew. Oh my gosh. And because Winota doesn't need to attack because Winota can't
Right.
trigger it herself. So
Winota
yeah.
just gets cast and sits there.
I mean,
So
I kind of like Clown Car, but
So I mean, ideally, like in what? So we talk about like the situation when you play this card. What are you casting it for? You know, what's the X value?
Winota is literally just looking for that 0 drop on turn 1, or maybe even 1 to hopefully get another attacker. But this is such a special scenario in my opinion because there's no other archetype out there that's just this one deck just rules the archetype, and
mhm.
there's not really like another way you can analyze this and like, oh, this stack, there's this stack. It's just Winota because Winota tackles the current meta so well because it races the turbo deck to the stacks instead of reacting to the turbo deck and trying to
So
mulligan to the turbo deck.
I think a funny like just imagine this situation. Turn one, land, mana crypt, Clown Car X3. Turn two, land Winota. Right. Go to
Ridiculous.
yeah. That seems good enough. And even if I mean, so you're not going to be drawing. Okay, you're not going to be cheating Clown Car into play because it's not a human.
Hmm.
But I feel like it's one of those cards that's good at all stages of the game, right? Because even if you're just casting it if you're casting it for 0, right, and using Winota to crew it, or using one of your humans to crew it, you are getting an extra Winota trigger, which that deck needs Winota triggers to really do its thing, right? Otherwise, it's just a bad Boros deck if you're not getting Winota triggers. And then even at the later stages of the game, right? If you're on like turn 6 or turn 7 and you have like, I don't know, 4 mana or whatever, and you top deck a Clown Car, you just cast it for X's 4. I mean, the deck doesn't do
Right.
much other, like it doesn't play out of hand other than casting Winota again.
Yeah.
It really just wants to get those triggers. And
Yep.
so putting yourself in the situation where you could get a lot more triggers by, rolling some funny clown dice, I don't know. It seems good enough and it seems funny enough that a lot of Winota decks could probably get away with playing it.
Yeah, which is actually just hilarious because it literally is Clown Car.
It's literally a Clown Car. And somehow
So
it's legal.
so kind of just bringing it all together. How for any archetype and any new card really, how long do you think you'd have to play a certain card to deem it either worthy or not worthy of your deck if you were considering it? Which I think is a really hard question to answer because of how many variables there are in a 4-person singleton
I
format. But I want to know what you think about that.
I know I've gotten in some disagreements with some people over the internet on this before.
Oh, as we do.
But I don't think you can play any less than 20 games to properly evaluate a card. I know Ken Bauman and the Krark Discord server came up with this document somewhere on the internet. I will find it and post it in the show notes later. But they wrote up a Google Doc about like how long it takes to evaluate cards, and there are like three different kinds of people when it comes to evaluating. There are like the scientists and like the casual researchers and the people who aren't actively trying. If you're testing out a card and you're willingly mulliganing to like four to find that card, or you're actively tutoring for that card just to play it, I think it only takes like 4 or 5 games where you have that card out to really understand it, because you're really invested in looking at that card. But when
Yep.
you have people who are really passively working on decks, where it's like they hear somebody else that heard somebody else that heard somebody else talk about this cool new card, right? And they're like, okay, I'll pick up a copy, I'll put it in my list. And then they play, 10, 15 games. They'll draw it sometimes. They won't cast it because, they don't know how good it is. So they're doing the things that they already know are good. They're not tutoring for it. They're not mulliganing for it. It can take a lot longer to properly evaluate a card
Yeah.
once you started testing it.
Yeah.
Usually I say 20 games. If you're going to play a cEDH deck with, if it's a brand new cEDH deck, if it's you're testing out like 15 new cards, even if you're testing out like 2 or 3 new cards, 20 games, then write up your conclusions based on what you found. That's at least how I evaluate cards.
That is interesting. To look at it in a games played per like how you're testing it type of way. Dante, what do you do when you're looking at a new card in your list?
Yeah, so I mean, this question is like, to me, it's kind of up to the pilot of their deck. I think when it comes to testing cards, you kind of see within a few games what works and what doesn't. Like Greg said, if you're really looking to draw that card and really test it out, if you're focusing in on that, it probably takes about 4 to 5 games to see what works and what doesn't. And I think this weeds out a lot of new cards that people may be testing. But then you'll have like those 1 to 2 cards that you want to look at even further. Like for me, I'm still testing out Archivist of Ogma. I'm still testing out Black Market Connections. Those are 2 cards that I'm still actively testing out, and I've been running them since they released. I find myself in the position also, that if this new card is in my hand and I can't do anything with it, say in 2 turns, max 3 turns, because the game might be over at that point, then I don't think it belongs in my deck.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that if you're actively tutoring for cards, right? And you're actively, especially in a more reactive setting, in a more mid-range setting, if you're actively tutoring for cards to force test them in games, you're not getting an accurate representation of what that testing is like.
True.
I'll admit, the other day I had an Imperial Seal and I tutored for Rashmi, because I had a brainstorm in my hand, it was like, this is going to be hilarious. I'll have Rashmi and I'll be able to stack some. I had a Rashmi on top of my library, brainstorm my hand with a force. And so it's like, I'm going to put something sick on top of my deck and I'm going to cheat it out with Rashmi. It's going to be awesome. Mainly because I just wanted that effect. It was a terrible decision. I should not have Imperial Sealed for Rashmi. But it's like, if you're doing that kind of testing, right, where it's like, oh, like I could do a cute thing right now if I divert from what is the proper game plan just to test out this cool thing, like you're not learning anything from that testing experience, right? You're just making a bad decision.
Yeah,
so
100%.
Aggressively forcing testing like that, where it's like, I'm tutoring for this card no matter what, and I'm gonna play it, or I'm mulliganing for this card no matter what, and I'm gonna play it. You're not gonna get great results. You have to be really careful about how you're testing cards, and so that's why I say 20 games is a fine threshold, especially in decks that draw a lot of cards, or if you're gonna see it more often, and you'll be able to see it more naturally.
Yeah, definitely the natural way of doing it, where you put it in your deck, and if it's not like an essential piece of your combo type thing, if you just kind of let it happen, like let it show up in your hand and let it be useful when it is useful, then I think that's a really good way to get a scope of a new card in any deck, really.
I agree. All right, and that's gonna start to wrap us up for the night. Is there any like final thoughts we want to talk about? Actually, hold up, I did have something. I sent a tweet out earlier today.
Okay.
I'm looking at this thing right now. I want to have a segment at the end of all of these podcast episodes where I'll tweet out something like an hour or two before we record, and I want to get a question and answer it on the podcast and just get your guys' thoughts and opinions. And I got this lovely question from Moop, a great fellow on the Curious Control Discord server. And the question is how to be comfortable with losing games. Like, if you're in a situation where it's like, I I know I played my game perfectly. Like, I did everything I could do and I still lost. Like, how do you cope with that, I guess?
Mm.
Or are there any, how do you keep away the bad feelings of losing games?
This is a very interesting question, and sorry, Evan, if I may answer. This is something that was actually brought up in one of the lectures that Charles had from Eminence Gaming, from the CDH University. And it's embracing loss as a learning point, and actually embracing losing as something that you want more often in order to learn than you do from winning.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of I'd like to add to that. You kind of learn nothing by just winning every single game you play, because I mean, that probably means you're just playing a better deck and you're pub stomping or something. But no game is going to ever be the same as the last. See position, cards in hand, what your opponents are doing, how you react, all these other things. So you want to actually have a healthy balance of games that you lose, and you want to really know why you lost them. Uh, the games that I take the most from are always the ones that I play with my friends or people that I know closely and personally, because I'm not afraid to ask them what happened during that game, why they made certain plays, or what they thought of this play that I made, or if I would have done something different, would they have reacted differently, all these other things. And there's all these elements that are impossible to keep track of, so don't even
Mm-hmm.
don't even try. But it gives you a really good idea of what mistake you made and how you can take away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe I should have gone for the win a turn earlier, I was just scared of being counterspelled. um, but maybe I should have reevaluated my opponent's cards in hand and mana and thought about what I was doing a little bit better. Or I'm sure everyone's had the game where they just punt the win because they sequenced something wrong, but
Yep.
then you're never going to make that mistake again because
Yeah.
you're able to
Yep.
talk about it and see the mistake that got
You always got to
made.
learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. And those
For
become
sure.
so impactful during gameplay. Those are the learning moments.
Mhm.
And because when I win, I don't really remember. I mean, I remember like how I won, but it's not useful information to me to accelerate future game plans. So really to drive home that you know what to do about losing, it's you have to embrace it, because that's where you're going to learn the most from CEH.
And something to comment on that, and we'll wrap up really quick after this, but 25% is the gold standard for a win rate in Commander, a competitive Commander, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
if you're winning way more than that, it means like two things: you're either cheating or you're not playing against your equals, and you're not improving, right? Because if you're winning, like, I see this all the time. People be like, "Oh my god, I'm winning like 63% of the games I'm playing." I'm like, "Dude, you're playing against terrible people. Like, you're
Yeah.
either playing against terrible people or you have the new deck, and you should go play in tournaments and you should go make thousands of dollars." And then they go play in tournaments and they don't win that because they're playing against really bad people most of the time.
And then Winito wins the tournament.
Yeah, but it's just something to think about, right? As long as you're still winning about 25% of your games, you are perfect. Like, the deck is doing what it's supposed to do. If you're winning way more than that and you're like, God, I'm so good at this, you're not improving. If you're winning 40-50% of your games consistently, you're not actually improving your own skills, and you need to find better players. And on
Right,
that
winning is
note,
one thing,
we're
and
gonna wrap up.
losing is definitely more important.
Yeah. So where can I find you guys on social medias?
Yeah, so you can find my Discord at zclan7. I'm on the Animar Discord, you can join there. Or my Twitter handle is at Evan Zyvel. It'll be linked in the description.
Be linked in the description
Yeah.
below. Dante, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm Dante, MTG, Dante Codominants. You'll find me floating around on a bunch of Discord servers, most notably Playing with Power. You can also find me on Twitter at Codominants. I hang out there occasionally from time to time. But yeah, that's about it for me.
And then you can find me. I'm at Curious Control on Discord. I'm at Curious Control on Twitter, and I hang out in the Curiosity Hub or the Control Hub or the Curio Hub. I'm not sure what the actual name of it is, but it's a cool Discord server where all sorts of control and mid-range minded people hang out and brew. I'm also on the Playing with Power server, and you can find me on a couple other places like the Paradox and the Evolution server, but I'm not super active there. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys next time. Bye.
Cue outro music.
Bye.
Cue outro music.